I don't know if anyone will believe me. Hell, I'm not even sure if I believe it myself. But I have to tell it, even if it sounds insane, because if it's happening to me, maybe it's happening to someone else too. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late for them. It began on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. My mother had sent me to the local store to fetch a few necessities. Milk, bread, eggs, the mundane list of things that had never before held any mystery. The sky was a soft gradient of late-day blues and golds as I stepped out, completely unaware of the presence that would forever haunt my memories. I walked along the quiet street, the gentle murmur of distant traffic a lullaby to an otherwise uneventful day. Halfway to the store, my attention was arrested by a sight so surreal that time itself seemed to pause. Across the road, beneath the dappled shade of a gnarled oak, stood a woman in a flowing white dress. Her long, dark hair spilled over her shoulders like a silken waterfall, and her face, so perfectly sculpted, held an expression of quiet mystery. As our eyes met, I felt an inexplicable pull, as if I were witnessing a vision meant only for me. In that charged moment, she raised her hand, offering a delicate, almost imperceptible wave, and then, with a coy wink, beckoned me closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I inched toward her, mesmerized by the impossibility of the encounter. But just as I was about to cross the street, my best friend Adrian clapped a hand on my shoulder, his cheerful greeting cutting through the spell. "Hey, man, what's up?" he said, his voice light and unconcerned. I jerked my gaze away, and in that fleeting second, the beautiful stranger dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only the eerie echo of her presence and the heavy weight of regret. I completed my errand in a daze, my mind swirling with questions I dared not speak aloud. Had I imagined it all? Or was it the beginning of something far darker than I could ever have anticipated? Later that same evening, as twilight surrendered to the neon glow of streetlights, I made my way home. My thoughts were still entangled with that mysterious woman. Then, as if summoned by my yearning, she reappeared. Under the pallid halo of a solitary street lamp at the corner of the block, she stood again in her immaculate white dress. Her eyes shone with an otherworldly light, and when she smiled, it was as if the darkness itself recoiled. I couldn't help but wave, an action fueled by hope and a burgeoning obsession. In an instant, she reciprocated with a graceful gesture, a slow, deliberate wave that sent shivers down my spine. I dashed across the street, desperate to close the distance between us, but when I arrived, there was nothing but empty space and the whisper of a cold wind. I searched the area, calling out softly, yet the only answer was the echo of my own voice bouncing off the silent facades of the night. I returned home with the groceries clutched tightly in my arms, my heart still thundering with disbelief and a gnawing sense of loss. That night, as I sat in the cramped familiarity of my room, trying to rationalize the inexplicable events, I glanced out the window and froze. There, illuminated by the harsh glare of a nearby lamp, was her. Standing across the street, she lifted a pale hand in greeting. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, she seemed to be watching me with an intensity that chilled my soul. Then, as if acknowledging my terror, her form contorted. Her gentle features twisted into a grotesque parody of beauty. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide. Her eyes darkened into bottomless voids, and her skin rippled with an unearthly motion. Before I could scream, she vanished again, leaving me trembling in a silence so thick I could almost feel it. My mother's dismissive scolding the next morning did little to soothe my terror. I was accused of spending too much time on my phone, of letting my imagination run wild. But I knew the truth. I had seen something that defied explanation, something that had reached out from the void of nightmares. Night after night, the terror escalated. I found no respite in sleep. Every dusk brought with it the same unbearable dread. In the gloom of my room, I became hyper-aware of every sound: a creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the curtains, the faintest whisper of movement in the dark. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of her in a mirror, her luminous eyes reflecting an unspoken promise of doom. Other nights, I awoke to the sensation of cold breath on my neck or the soft, deliberate pressure of unseen hands on my skin. One evening, as the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls outside my window, I heard a knock on the door, a slow, methodical rap that sent my pulse racing. With every ounce of courage, I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. In the faint light of the corridor, I saw nothing at first. But then, standing just beyond the threshold, was that spectral figure. Her presence was both mesmerizing and horrifying. The woman in white, now partially revealed in the dim glow, her form a shifting blend of ethereal beauty and nightmarish decay. I backed away, my mind screaming for escape. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. In the hours before dawn, I sat huddled in a corner, listening to the incessant scratching at the walls and the soft, haunting whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. And then came the final blow, an encounter so visceral it has seared itself into my memory. I awoke in a cold sweat one night, certain that I was being watched. The moon hung low in the sky, casting sinister shadows across my room. I lay in bed, paralyzed by a fear that was more real than any nightmare. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a dark shape began to materialize at the edge of the room. At first, it was nothing more than a blur, a vague outline of a figure, too silent and too still to be real. But as I forced my eyes to adjust, I saw her clearly, the woman in white, no longer the beguiling stranger of the daytime, but a creature twisted by malice. Her limbs stretched in unnatural angles, her nails elongated into sharp, deadly talons, and her hair, wild and bristling like the spines of a sea urchin, framed a face contorted in silent menace. Frozen in terror, I could only watch as she slowly advanced, her presence suffocating the very air around me. Every rational thought fled as her eyes, now burning with an unholy light, fixed upon me. I tried to scream, to move, but my body was a prison of paralyzing fear. With each agonizing step, she drew closer, until I could feel the chill of her presence brush against my skin. And then, in one horrifying moment, she leaned forward. Her mouth, agape and lined with teeth that gleamed like broken glass, extended a long, sinuous tongue toward my face. I shut my eyes in pure terror, and in that blink, I awoke to the gentle caress of early morning sunlight streaming through my window. For a fleeting moment, I believed the nightmare had ended, but the horror was far from over. I woke in a hospital bed several days later, battered and barely clinging to life. The doctors insisted that I had suffered a violent assault, a mysterious fall down the stairs that had left me with deep cuts and inexplicable bruises. Adrian was missing, and my mother's worried gaze held secrets she refused to share. I was told I was lucky to be alive, but inside I knew there was no luck in surviving the terrors of that night. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, I replayed the events over and over in my mind. The vivid images of the woman in white, her ghostly smile turning into a snarl of malevolence, haunted every thought. And then I remembered something that sent a chill deeper than any wound. The soft murmur of her voice, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, the sound of her laughter echoing in the corridors of my mind. As I lay in that cold, white room, I began to piece together fragments of my encounters, details that I had initially dismissed as hallucinations born from fever and trauma. There was the eerie consistency of her appearances. Outside the store, under the streetlight, at my window, and within the dark confines of my room. And then there was the unspeakable moment when I felt her cold hand press against my skin, her eyes promising something terrible that I couldn't escape. I decided to record every detail every whispered horror in a journal, hoping that if I could articulate the nightmare, I might find some rational explanation. But the more I wrote, the more I began to question my own sanity. Had I been tormented by a vengeful spirit? Or had I unwittingly become the target of something far more sinister, a creature that defied the natural order, slipping in and out of the fabric of reality at will? The days after my hospital stay were spent in a haze of dread. My body was weak, but my mind was alert and hyper-vigilant. I noticed strange marks on my arms, scratches that wouldn't fade, as if her claws had left a permanent signature on my flesh. I began to wonder if these were merely the physical remnants of my encounters, or if they were symbols of a curse, a sign that the creature had somehow attached itself to me. Late one night, after I had returned home against medical advice, I sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, reading through my journal. The entries grew increasingly frantic, desperate pleas for help that I feared no one would understand. In the margins of one page, I scrawled a chilling observation. Her eyes, they are everywhere. Even in the mirror, I see them watching. I shuddered at the thought that perhaps the entity had not only stalked me physically, but had seeped into my very soul. Then, as if in answer to my silent prayers, the terror returned with a vengeance. I awoke one stormy night to find that my room was bathed in an unnatural darkness, as if the shadows had taken on a life of their own. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the familiar soft creak of my floorboards was replaced by a distant, guttural humming. In the corner of the room, where the darkness pooled the deepest, I saw her silhouette emerging once more, the woman in white, her form now more monstrous than ever before. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering in my chest, and fled toward the door. But the room seemed to stretch into an endless labyrinth of corridors, each turn filled with oppressive gloom. Panic set in as I realized that no matter where I went, the creature was always one step behind, her spectral presence a constant reminder of my impending doom. I collapsed in the hallway, gasping for air as thunder roared outside. In that desperate moment, I recalled the fragments of an old legend I had once dismissed, a tale of a vengeful spirit who wandered the night, forever cursed to haunt those who had witnessed her tragic demise. Could it be that this creature was not a random nightmare, but a restless soul with a vendetta against the living? As dawn broke, I found a cryptic note tucked under my door, a message scrawled in shaky handwriting that chilled me to the core. You cannot run from what is bound to you. The curse is not mine to bear, but yours to share. Beware the white veil that hides the truth. I never learned who left that note. All I knew was that the horror was far from over. In the following days, the boundaries between my waking life and my nightmares blurred. At every turn, in every reflective surface, I saw hints of her, the twisted grin, the glint of those hollow eyes. The realization gnawed at me. Maybe I wasn't the victim after all. One rainy evening, as I stared into the mirror, trying to find solace in my own eyes, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The scratches on my arms, the ones I had believed were marks of her claws, were shifting, forming patterns, symbols that resembled her distorted visage. In that horrifying moment, it struck me. The curse was not something that stalked me from the outside. It was something that had begun to take root within me, infecting every part of my being. I realized with dawning terror that I was becoming what I had feared most, a vessel for her malevolence. The realization was not immediate, but it seeped into my consciousness like poison. I recalled every encounter, every fleeting moment of terror, and understood that my survival had come at a terrible cost. The creature had not merely been an external tormentor. She had been implanting herself into me, her essence merging with my soul. I now live in a state of perpetual dread, a prisoner within my own body, unsure where her influence ends and my own will begins. Every shadow hides a promise of her return, Every whisper in the wind sounds like her laughter. I cling to sanity with every ounce of strength I have, but the fear that I might one day become the monster I fought so desperately to escape is a constant, gnawing terror. The horror is far from over. I have survived the nightmarish attacks, but I now face a daily struggle against the darkness that threatens to consume me from within. And as I write these words, trembling in the dim light of another restless night, I cannot help but wonder, is the woman in white truly gone, or has she become a part of me, destined to haunt every moment of my existence? I leave this account as both a warning and a plea, for if you ever see a figure in white waving at you from across a silent street, do not be lured by her beauty. For beneath that angelic faud lies a horror that defies explanation, a terror that may not only stalk you in the night, but may also find its way into your very soul. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you again next week.